Okay, I'm back. My computer died. It didn't give me a... Hang on, let me do one more thing real quick. Let me do this. Okay, I'm back. Is everybody here? Sorry about that. My computer died and it didn't give me a low battery warning or anything, so I had to plug it in. So we should be good now. We're on what? We're on my hotspot and computer's plugged in. So again, 2.4, number 5. F of x is negative 8x plus 20. G of x is x squared plus 16. So there's my two functions, my f of x function and my g of x function. On number 5, it wants me to find f of 4 minus g of 4. So 2 things need to occur. The first thing that needs to happen is I need to go and find my f of 4, which means go to my f function and replace this x with a 4. Then I'm going to go to my g function and do the same thing. I'm going to replace that x with a 4. I'm going to get 2 solutions, and then I'm going to do whatever this is telling me to do right here with those 2 answers, which in this case is subtract. So let's find f of 4 first. So I'll go to my f function, replace this x with a 4. So I'll have negative 8 times 4 plus 20. Negative 8 times 4 gives me negative 32. Bring down the plus 20. And then negative 32 plus 20 gives me negative 12. Go do the same thing in the g. So I'm going to find g of 4, which means I'm going to have 4 squared plus 16. 4 squared gives me 16 plus 16, which gives me 32. So again, get your 2 solutions and then do whatever the mathematical operation says to do between here. So it says to subtract. And negative 12 minus 32 gives me negative 44. All right, number 6. On number 6, f of x is negative 11x plus 5. G of x is x squared plus 14. And let's see, it tells me it wants me to find f of 1 times g of 1. Does it say 1 or no? Yeah. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find f of 1. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to find g of 1. And then this mathematical operation says I'm going to multiply those 2 solutions together. So let's find out what f of 1 will give me. I'll go to my f function and replace the x with a 1. So negative 11 times 1 plus 5. Negative 11 times 1 gives me negative 11. Bring down the plus 5. And negative 11 plus 5 gives me negative 6. Go to your g function and replace its x with a 1. So g of 1 I replace this x with a 1. I'll have 1 squared plus 14. 1 squared gives me 1. Bring down my plus 14, which gives me 15. So there's my two solutions. So once again, go back to the beginning and see what mathematical operation it wants you to do to those two answers, which is multiply. So I'm going to do negative 6 times 15, which gives me negative 90. All right? Number 7. All right, same thing. It's going to give me two functions. F of x is negative 11x plus 17. G of x is x squared plus 11. It wants me to find f of negative 2 over g of negative 2. So f of negative 2 over g of negative 2. So same thing's going to happen. I'm going to find f of negative 2. Then I'm going to go find g of negative 2. Get my two answers and put the f solution over the g solution and then reduce it if I need to. So let's see. F of negative 2. Replace the x with negative 2. So I'll have negative 11 times negative 2 plus 17. So let's see, negative 11 times negative 2. Since it's a negative times a negative, it'll be positive 22 plus 17, which gives me 39. And then go do the same thing with your g. G of negative 2. Now remember, I'm going to replace that x squared with negative 2. When you square things in your calculator, you got to give it parentheses. So I'll have negative 2 squared plus 11. So negative 2 squared gives me positive 4 plus 11 gives me 15. So now, again, what did it want me to do? It wants me to put the f solution, which is 39, over the g solution, which is 15. So let's see what that gives me. I have 39 over 15. Now, the answer is going to want, they're going to want it in simplest form. And I can't remember if I showed y'all this before. But remember how to reduce fractions in your calculator. I have 39 over 15. So 39 over 15, just type it in just like that. Hit enter, get your decimal. Remember, MathLab doesn't want the decimal answer, so you'll hit the math button and then enter twice. That'll reduce your fraction for you. So that reduced that 39 over 15 to 13 over 5. All right, moving on to number 8. F of x equals negative 2x plus 4. G of x equals x squared plus 5. So this time it wants me to find f plus g of x. So just like the last problems, I'm going to start off by finding f. It's just not a number I'm replacing x with. Essentially, I'm replacing x with x, which means I'm not even changing the f function at all, right? It already has an x. So the f of x is just negative 2x plus 4. That wants me to add that to g of x. And what is the g of x function? Well, it's x squared plus 5. So you're just adding the two functions together exactly how they are already written. And what this adding is just a simple way to say combine your like terms. So let's see. What are the terms that are going to be combined here? You're going to be able to combine this positive 4 with that positive 5, right? There's no reason to write those two terms separately when you can write them together. So let's see, what's going to be my first term? It's going to want you to write your answer with the highest exponent term first. So I'm going to start off with the x squared, then the negative 2x, and then the plus 9 from putting the 4 and the 5 together. All right, number 9. This time, f of x is 5x minus 9. G of x is 2x minus 5. And this time it wants me to find f minus g of x. Now, you need to be careful when you're subtracting. It's got a little kink in it. So what do I need to find first? I need to find my f of x function first. Well, f of x is just this, 5x minus 9. Now, I'm going to subtract the g of x function from that. So minus 2x minus 5. Now, here's the thing. The way I have this written right here is not subtracting that whole second function. The only thing that this says to subtract is the 2x. I want to subtract this whole entire function, not just the first part of it, which means I need parentheses around that second function. So let's see. That means I need to distribute this. So let's see what I have. I have 5x minus 9. Distribute this. So this negative 2x. And then this negative does what to this negative? It turns it to positive 5. So that's the kink. You need to make sure you're subtracting that whole second function, which means to put it in parentheses and distribute that minus through there. And then combine your like terms. So let's see. I can put this 5x with that minus 2x to get 3x. And then I have a minus 9 and a plus 5 that I can put together to get minus 4. So 3x minus 4 is what you would end up with. All right, number 10. Number 10, I have negative 5x plus 2 is my f of x function. My g of x function is x squared minus 5. And this time it wants me to find g minus f of x. So it does make a difference where this g and f are, right? The last problems have always said f plus g or f minus g. They flip-flopped it this time, so make sure you're paying attention to that. So I've got g minus f of x. So let's see, what's my g function? X squared minus 5. Now remember, since I'm subtracting, I'm going to put what I'm subtracting in the parentheses. So I make sure I'm taking into account the whole function. So minus negative 5x plus 2, right? Because you've got the g minus the f. So let's see. I'm going to distribute this minus first. So I have x squared minus 5. If I distribute this, negative times a negative gives me positive 5x. And then this negative turns that positive 2 into negative 2. So you make sure you distribute that before you start combining your like terms. So let's see, what can go together? It looks like just that negative 5 and that negative 2 can go together. So I'll have x squared plus 5x. And then you put the negative 5 and the negative 2 together to get negative 7. All right, number 11. All right, if 11, it just makes the f and the g capital. It doesn't make any difference at all. F of x is x squared minus 12. G of x is 12 minus x. This time it wants me to find f minus g of negative 10. So this one's not an x, so I can't just rewrite these and subtract them. I've got to plug the negative 10 into each of those functions first, like we were doing at the beginning, get my two solutions, and then subtract my two solutions since it wants me to subtract them. So first things first, I need to find f of negative 10. So I'll go to my f function. Replace the x with negative 10, so I'll have negative 10 squared minus 12. So negative 10 squared is positive 100. Bring down the minus 12 to get 88. So now I need to find g of negative 10. So I'll go to my g function and replace its x with negative 10. Be careful with your signs here. My function says 12 minus, then what do you replace that x with? You already got the minus, but that's from the function. It's not from the number you're putting in. So I have 12 minus, and then I put in negative 10. So I'm doing minus a negative here, which actually means you're adding, right? If you're taking away something negative, you're actually adding it. So 12 plus 10, which gives me 22. So my two solutions are 88 and 22. And since it says to subtract them, that is exactly what I'll do. 88 minus 22 gives me 66. All right, number 12. F of x is x squared minus 15. G of x is 6 minus x. And it wants me to find f times g of c. Okay, so this one's a little different. It's just not plugging in a number. What do I do with whatever is in these second parentheses? That's what you go to each function and replace the x with. So it's just not a 10 or a -2. I'm just going to replace the x's with c's. And then once I do that, it tells me it wants me to multiply my two solutions together. So I'm going to find f of c first, which just means go to your your f function, this one right here, and replace that x with a c. So if I do that, I'll have c squared minus 15. Now, go to your g function and replace its x with a c. So I'm going to find g of c, which means replace this x with a c, which will just be 6 minus c. So my two solutions are c squared minus 15 and 6 minus c. And what does it want me to do with those two solutions? It wants me to multiply them together. So let's look at what that's going to look like. I think once we write it out, you'll see exactly what you're supposed to do. You're going to have c squared minus 15 times 6 minus c. So now you can see that you need to FOIL this, right? You need to first, outer, inner, last. So here I have c squared times 6, which just gives me 6c squared. My outer, c squared times -c. Be careful with your sign. You have a positive times a negative, which is going to give me -c to the third power. In my inner, -15 times 6 gives me -90. And then my last, negative times a negative, which gives me positive 15 times c, which is just 15c. Now, even though none of those terms can combine because none of them have the same exponent, so none of them are like terms, I do need to rearrange that order, okay? The way your math lab is going to say is type the polynomial in descending order, which means it wants its highest exponent term to come first and then to go down from there. So what is the term with the highest exponent? It's this c to the third, and it's a negative. You got to bring the whole term, including the sign. So negative c to the third, then this c squared, so a positive 6c squared, then your c, so positive 15c, and then your plain number, and which is -90. Okay? 13, which is the last one like this. All right, 13. F of x is x squared minus 3. G of x is 1 minus x. And it wants me to find f over g of -3. So f over g of -3. So now I do have a number to plug in. So I need to go plug that -3 into my f function. Then I'm going to go plug that -3 into that g function. And then it says to put the f answer over the g answer. So let's see what that gives me. Let's see what f of -3 is. So I have -3, replacing the x. So I have -3 squared minus 3. -3 squared gives me 9 minus 3, which is 6. Now go to your g and replace it with -3. That'll give me 1 minus, replace your x with -3, which really means 1, here it is again, 1 plus 3, which is 4. So my f answer ended up being 6. My g answer ended up being 4. It wants me to put the f over the g, so I'll put the 6 over the 4, and then I'll reduce that to write it in lowest terms. Since 2 goes into both of these numbers, we'll be able to reduce that to 3 over 2. All right, the last few problems are something a little different. It's still going to give us 2 functions. On number 14, the f of x function is x squared. The g of x function is 10x minus 10. So there's my 2 functions. What it wants me to do, it's going to ask me 3 different things. It's going to ask me to find the domain of 3 different things. The domain of the sum of those 2 functions, the difference between those 2 functions, and the product of those 2 functions. So before we actually take all this time to go, because what does the sum mean to do? It means to add those 2 functions together and then find the domain of it. The difference means to subtract those 2 functions from each other and then find the domain of it. The product means multiplication, which means I would have to go through and multiply those 2 functions together. But let's think about this. Look at your 2 functions. One is x squared. One is 10x minus 10. Remember when we talked about the domain on Monday, what we were looking for is any kind of restrictions we would have in the domain, which came from x's in the denominator, right? If I had something like this with an x in the denominator, that means I'm going to have a restriction in the domain because you can't have 0 in your denominator. But look at these two functions, x squared and 10x minus 10. I'm not even going to take the time to add those together because I know if I add those together, am I going to get a denominator? I'm not going to get a denominator unless I put one of them over the other one and put something in the bottom. If you add these 2 functions together, you're not going to get an x in your denominator because you're not going to have the bottom part of a fraction. You're not going to have it even if you subtract them, right? If you did x squared minus 10x minus 10, it's not going to give you an x in your denominator. You're not going to have a denominator. Same thing if you multiply them. X squared times 10x minus 10. How in the world is that going to give you an x in your denominator? It's not. Which means there's no restrictions. If there's not any restrictions in this or this on your domain, and there's not, right? Because there's no x's in the denominators of any of those, all 3 of those are going to have the same answer. They're all going to be all real numbers. And the way that MathLab states it is The domain of each one of these is x is a real number. Okay, does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, if you do, you can unmute yourself or type it in chat or out here, anybody. Okay, so it's going to be the same thing on all three of those. X is a real number, X is a real number, X is a real number. Because again, like I said, the only way you can get a restriction is if you have an X in your denominator, which I think you'll see more clearly once we do number 15. Number 15, the functions are, the f of x function is 1 over x minus 3. The g of x function is 7x to the third. And again, it wants me to find the same thing. It wants me to find the domain of three things. The domain of the sum of those two functions, the difference between those two functions, and the product of those two functions. All right, long story short, there's a restriction on the domain with this function, right? Because it has an x in its denominator, which means I need to find the restriction of this function, its domain. So I need to see what makes x minus 3 cannot equal 0, right? We did some of this on Monday. Your denominator can't equal 0, so set it up to not equal 0 and then solve it. I'm going to have to add the 3 to both sides. So x cannot equal 3. That is a restriction of that one. Does this one have any restrictions? No, because it doesn't have an x in the denominator. So here's the thing. You do not want to take the time to actually add, subtract, and multiply those two functions. That's a lot more work than how hard this problem needs to be. Okay? If I added those two functions together, I would still have an x minus 3 in my answer. If I subtracted these two functions from each other, I would still have an x minus 3 in my answer. If I multiplied these two functions together, again, I would still have an x minus 3 in my answer, which means every single one of these have the same answer. And the way that it states it there is x is a real number and then you write in your restriction, x cannot equal 3 for all three of those. All right, any questions on that? Oh, yeah. All right, last one of this section, and then we're going to do the first couple of problems, or the first 3 problems in 9.1. All right, f of x is 3x minus 2. G of x is 2x minus 14. And it wants me to find the domain of f over g. So it wants me to put the f function over the g function and then find the domain of whatever that is. So what is my f function? It's 3x minus 2. My g function is 2x minus 14. So here is what that would look like. Is there an x in your domain? I mean, excuse me, in your denominator? Yes, there's an x right here. which means we need to find the restriction because 2x minus 14 can't equal 0. So let's see what happens. If I solve this, I'd add the 14 to both sides. So 2x can't equal 14. And then divide by 2. So x cannot equal 7. So x is a real number. And x cannot equal 7. Okay? Okay, so that wraps up 2.4. We're going to start 9.1. We're just going to do the first 3. And it flows kind of directly from 2.4. So in 2.4, we did a lot of adding functions together, subtracting functions, multiplying functions, putting one function over another function. 9.1 is called, we're going to work with what's called the composition of functions. So it's still going to give us 2 functions, but it's going to ask us to do something a little bit different with them. Number 1, f of x is x minus 1. G of x is x squared minus 5. And it wants me to find f of g of negative 2. So f of g of negative 2. That's what it looks like. This is not a multiplication symbol. That's a composition symbol. F of g of negative 2. So here is how this is going to work. The first thing you're always going to do is find out whatever is on the inside, which is what I call this right here. So that's what I need to find first. I need to find g of negative 2. That's going to give me an answer, right? Once I go to the g function and replace its x with negative 2, I'll have an answer. Once I find that answer, I'm going to find f of whatever that answer is. So it's 2 parts. Find the inside first, which is g of negative 2. So go to your g function, replace its x with negative 2. So negative 2 squared minus 5. Let's see, negative 2 squared is positive 4. Bring down your minus 5 to get negative 1. So g of negative 2 gave me negative 1. That's just the first step. Remember, what I said to do with this answer is now to find f, which is the outside, of whatever that solution was. So what am I finding f of? Negative 1. So let's see. I'm going to go to my f function this time and replace its x with negative 1. So I'll have negative 1 minus 1, which gives me negative 2. And that's your final answer. So the 3 problems that we're going to work out in this section are all going to be composition problems, just like this. Number 2, my f function is 3x plus 4. My g function is x squared minus 2x minus 5. And this time it wants me to find g of f of 7. So look how they flip-flop the G and F. It's important, your first step, it doesn't matter where the G and F are, you're finding whatever is lined up right there, the inside of that function. So this time I'm actually going to go to the F function, replace its X with a 7, right? F of 7 is what I'm finding. So once I do this, it's going to give me a solution, correct? And then I'm going to go to the G function and plug in whatever that solution is. So let's see, F of 7 means go to your F function and replace this X here with a 7. So I'll have 3 times 7 plus 4. 3 times 7 gives me 21 plus 4, which gives me 25. So there's my first step. So now what do I do? What's my outer step? I'm going to find G of whatever that answer was. So I'm finding G of 25, which means go to your G and replace its X with 25. So when I do that, I'll have 25 squared minus 2 times 25 minus 5. So 25 squared means 25 times 25, which is 625, minus 50. From 2 times 25, bring down the minus 5. Let's see, 625 minus 50 gives me 575. Bring down the minus 5, which gives me 570. All right, and then the last one we're going to work for today is number 3. F of x is 3x plus 2. G of x is x to the 3rd. And we're finding f of g of negative 4. So what's inside this time? The g. I'm finding g of negative 4. So replace that x with negative 4. So what is that going to give me? Negative 4 to the 3rd power, which gives me negative 64. So there's the first step. Now, what's the outer part? Is the f. So I'm finding f of whatever that answer was. So f of negative 64. Which means I'm going to go to my f function and replace this x with negative 64. So if I do that, I'll have 3 times negative 64 plus 2. Well, 3 times negative 64 gives me negative 192. Bring down my plus 2. And negative 192 plus 2 gives me negative 190. Okay? Now, the problems start changing on this one, on this section after that. So we're going to hold on to that until Friday so we can start fresh. So on Friday, we're going to do the end of 9.1 and then do 9.2. Okay? So are there any questions before we end? All right. Well, I will see y'all on Friday.